Why is everything unsustainable now when things were easier 20 years ago?
One possible factor. When I was working on my degrees in workforce development and organizational leadership in the late 90s early 2000s, a major topic was, what is industry doing to face the challenge of millions of baby boomers retiring in 2019 and beyond? The answer was basically nothing. Corporations and state agencies should have ramped up education, training and recruiting. Those things, however, are a direct hit to profit. An investment in an uncertain future when the business environment placed its focus on immediate gains. The threat was clear to business schools pre-2015. Global slowdowns in productivity due to a massive unprecedented retirement wave. 2020 created a collective amnesia, forgetting that we predicted this outcome long ago. Chose to do nothing, and now it's an immediate crisis, with everyone finger pointing. TLD, or businesses saw the train wreck coming and chose to do nothing so they could get bailed out by governments and taxpayers when they called it a crisis. We are currently in the second, or third, Gilded Age, which means that our core society focuses on wealth and luxury as a primary goal, as opposed to focusing on core sustainability and essential services as a primary goal. So long as society focuses and glorifies wealth above meeting everyone's basic needs first, and then wealth second, it'll only get worse. You need to look at productivity versus wages. They disconnected in the early 70s. Rich got richer. The rest stayed in same place and slowly sunk to the ground. Now we are up to our necks and it is getting harder to breathe. And yet, there are enough idiots who scream this is normal and nothing gets done. You have a few things coming to a head at once. 1. The major issue is the boomers aging out and a smaller population behind them. General X. This is going to create a situation in which you have the next to retire population, who is typically at the top of their earning capacity, having a smaller population supporting the retiring boomers. 2. You have boomers refusing to retire and occupying top slots from subsequent generations. 3. Income inequality has been consistently getting worse over the past 50 years. You have larger and larger swaths of wealth going to fewer and fewer. It's not zero-sum, but it's darn close. 4. Locally, you've had pollination of political views that started in the early 1990s with Newt Gingrich and his ilk. It's been getting more pronounced. 5. In the US, you've had 40-plus years of supply-side economics, which is fine in small doses. But the US overdosed on it, and doesn't really temper it with bubble-up policies. You wind up with zombie companies and zombie investors. 6. There is a cultural shift that started about 15 years ago with social media taking over traditional means of interacting. This isn't bad, per se, but it's different, and creates friction between generations. Each side will claim their way is better, and causes a rift between groups. 7. Back in the US, infrastructure has been largely ignored, and there is a day of reckoning coming up. 8. We're noticing, with increased frequency, that climate change is real, and we haven't done much over the past 50 years to curtail it. 9. Proliferation of fake news sources. Increased targeting with social media helps to isolate and concentrate fringe groups. Some can be positive, but for the most part, it creates myriad pockets of insanity. Since the groups become cult-like, it's difficult to deprogram the individuals. 10. In regulated capitalism depends on exploitable resources and infinite growth. We're running lower on both versus 50 years ago. In the US, there is money in politics, which became much more pronounced after Citizens United.
You have people lobbying for present-day profits versus long-term sustainability. This is now coming to a head.
TBH, a big part of this is demographics. We had this massive population pyramid, and you basically could run the world by just waiting for kids to grow up and join the workforce. They structured economies around these insane estimated growth obligations. See Eric Weinstein about this topic. And when the demographics flattened, we didn't have the 27 firefighters paying into the pension to pay for the one pensioner. Many of the economic bottlenecks we are seeing are a result of slamming on the brakes of population growth when the whole world was structured around an exponential growth model.
When you borrow from the future, time gets back at you.
It's the disappearance of the middle class and the emergence of the super rich. Money has collected at the top and stayed there. It's really that simple. What is your exact location? Things might be different between Japan and Algeria. That said, it was already known 20 years ago that with the economic crisis and the environmental crisis that the Jenny would had an harder life than their parents. People don't realize that human societies do not move in a linear fashion. The phrase history repeats itself doesn't come from nothing. Our markets are cyclical. We are actually in a very similar position to 100 years ago. Corporations have grown so strong that the government has tipped into full oligarchy mode. What's best for the corporations is usually the opposite of what's best for America. A massive amount of middle-class jobs in the West were outsourced to China, manufacturing, and India. Call center, back office, IT support. Starting in the early 2000s, the typical candidates for those jobs were high school, manufacturing, and college graduates, white collar, where the industries could train the workers through experience for the skills they were missing. The reduced labor costs allowed for products to get radically cheaper and companies to make massive profits. Those profits were funneled through stock markets to the wealthy. Since 2008, some structural issues were hidden by central government money printing and deficit spending. 2020 was the peak of that printing and spending. But none of that money was invested in capacity or people. So now, no one invests in increasing supply because China has all the factory capacity the world could ever need. Companies don't invest in people because they don't need entry-level workers. They only want experienced workers to manage the entry-level workers overseas. Because 40 years ago, boomers started to pull up all the ladders that got them their sweet standards of living. They voted in people like Reagan and Newt Gingrich who cut regulations, diverted money to the wealthy, starved infrastructure, dismantled the labor movement and cut college aid. This created a huge income disparity. Citizens United put the nail in the coffin by guaranteeing that only the very wealthy would have any real say in public policy. So, the income disparity went from being morally offensive to literally disenfranchising most Americans. So here we are. Part of a functional capitalist system is workers demanding money and tanking corporations if they're refused. We aren't doing that. We need a revolution to show them who is in charge. Some companies need to be brought to their knees. It doesn't have to be a communist or socialist movement. It can just be unionization or sabotage from the inside. I don't want to say violence is the answer, because I don't think it is the right answer. I do want to point out that historically, violence is the outcome of the mistreatment of workers. West Virginia coal wars is a prime example. If things don't swing back, buildings will burn and blood will be spilled. Because the workers outnumber management. We're not a bright species. And often nothing gets solved until blood is spilled. Reaganomics. There are other reasons, but it functionally destroyed the economy that allowed people to work part-time at a diner and afford a mortgage and car.
Citizens United ruined any part of for the people in the U.S.
Profit margins are getting bigger, especially during the pandemic when they could really crush people, which is squeezing out people who work for a living. That's basically it. Because money is God now. It's all about the almighty dollar for the bosses and owners of companies behind our society. You are a combination of profits from birth to death. Just an endless stream of cash into some CEO's pocket. Go to church for some spiritual advice or solace, and the preacher is stuffing your and everyone else's cash into his pocket to buy a freaking jet. Everyone is desperately trying to make a buck, littering auction sites with overpriced shoes no one will ever wear. Capitalism is at its last gasp. It is absolutely unsustainable at this point. I literally just walked out of a global economics class where we discussed exactly this. Essentially, the owners of capital, businesses, machines, wealth, have seen their profits go up around 65% in the last 20 years, while the working class has seen its profits go up by less than 5%. That's income of tens hundreds of millions of dollars being increased by 65%, while incomes of hundreds thousands of dollars only going by 5%. At the same time, inflation has gone up by significantly more than 5%, making the working classes poorer than they were before. In the US it's even worse than that, because in the last 20-30 years we have been cutting public funding while also cutting taxes on the wealthy. The public needs to pay for more things out of their own pocket than before. College, for example, used to be largely subsidized by state government, and they have less money to do it with. TLDR. The average person is poorer than the average person was 20-30 years ago, while things also cost more. You know how corporations have been exploiting people in third world countries for decades. They finally decided that we are no different. I want to add that kids are growing up with access to information technology and being shown over and over the failings of the world from a young age. Many of our worldviews were shaped by scientists warning politicians and companies about global warming and environmental collapse, and are now living through the consequences of natural disasters because our politicians did nothing. We got to grow up watching our futures being pillaged by adults. We see the cruelty and exploitation that our comfortable lives have on less developed countries. And we get to see our rights being stripped away by politicians solely to keep us distracted from the real environmental problems that they are stalling on. The difference is that we grew up seeing warning after warning, and now have to exist in a world where the warnings were ignored.
50 years of trickle-down theory.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.